Thank you. So first off, I just want to echo what Martina just said. I am deeply honored to step in for Benjelis today. And I just want to express my admiration for his many remarkable achievements in the realms of social justice and civil rights. I think that stands at the heart of our discussion today and relates to all of our speakers' work here. I will get started with a question for you, Ranquin. As a former community organizer and as a researcher, you have been exposed to public deliberations on policy from different perspectives, including those focused on climate action. Could you speak to how climate transition policies address the needs of communities that have been historically harmed by hazardous waste? And how feasible is it to ensure that policymakers are moving towards just transitions that the public will accept?
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the organizers for putting together this event and for inviting me to be on this panel. And I'd like to acknowledge my collaborators. And so this is a collaboration with Steve Kimbrough, who's at Wharton, along with doctoral students, including a doctoral student here today, Rihanna Odendahl, who is a student in the School of Sociology and the School of Education, who's doing her dissertation on youth climate activists. And as Martina said, I'm a former community organizer. I spent the better part of 10 years organizing families who were experiencing homelessness or were very low income in Oakland, and also immigrant and refugee rights communities in the San Francisco Bay Area. And our work, my collaboration with Kimbrough, I think directly touches on the questions that you pose around how can we make climate transition policies more accessible to all communities, especially communities in under-resourced neighborhoods. And we know that the negative effects of hazardous waste or unsafe water or poor air quality, we know that these negative effects, urban heat islands, we know that they disproportionately impact poor communities, they disproportionately impact immigrant and refugee communities, racially minoritized communities. And alongside these environmentally unjust conditions, we know that policymakers often don't fully represent the interests of these underserved communities. Public decisions are often distal. They're often distal to the communities who are impacted by these policies. And this is certainly the case with policies designed to transition to clean energy solutions and to greater sustainability. Decisions in the policy sphere are rarely made accessible to everyday folks. And with transition policies, it may feel like to everyday folks that we don't have the scientific expertise or the understanding to be involved in decision making. And this is the crux of the research that is sponsored by EII, our work on public deliberation. Our contention is that by providing structures and resources for everyday folks to learn about municipal climate transition policies, and especially to consider how these policies impact their well-being, that such efforts have the potential to more authentically involve people in the decision-making and policy-making process. So rather than leaving it up to policymakers to make decisions without the true involvement of their constituents, our hope is that we can move toward a system that provides access to all. This is a key component of environmental justice, as we know, that all communities, including poor communities, including communities of color, including immigrant and refugee communities, that all communities have access to and involvement in the decisions impacting their lives. And I know we want a discussion, and so hopefully I'll have some opportunities to share more about this scholarship as we move forward in the discussion.
Thank you. I'll move on to Nicole Thomas. Another very bespoke question. As the co-founder of the Research and Equity and Academic Community Partnerships for Health in Philadelphia, you are bridging the gaps between researchers and communities to advance knowledge with value. Could you speak to the research, could you speak to how research can break the wheel of systemic inequity and move together with the community towards more just outcomes?
Yes, thank you all for having me today. Just jumping right into, I guess, what's at the core of that is the inequity piece of it. And so I think one of the things that research can do is examine current structures that create power dynamics, reframe the conversation and culture around what knowledge actually is and who possesses that knowledge, giving credence and value to all sorts of knowledge, community-based knowledge, lived experience, as well as academic knowledge, which currently sits at the center of all knowledge. And so it is valued in a different way. So I think just really taking a critical examination of how we even approach the research entity in general is really important. I think beyond that, really involving those who are impacted by the studies that we sort of initiate from the institutional side, really centering their voices and their lived experiences to better inform research from the start so that it is relevant and so that it is impactful and it can actually be translated into practice. So for the REACH initiative, which again stands for Research and Equity and Academic Community Partnerships for Health, we aim to make it easy and efficient for research and community members to find one another to build sustainable and equitable partnerships. Our core piece of this program is supported by the Office of the Vice Provost for Research here at Penn to build the infrastructure by way of an online portal where folks could actually just go in and set up profiles. It's currently active from the research side, from the academic side, and from the community side, and really learn about other potential partners, their work. There's also trainings, speaker series, capacity building activities for not just community members, but really for academics as well. One of the things that may sound strange to some folks is that even senior academic researchers could use some training when it comes to how to really engage in an authentic manner with community members. Maybe even stranger is, for community-based research in particular, is possibly visiting those communities, learning about the people, building real connections, and I mean the PI, not just the research team. This is really built upon the infrastructure we created with the Community Scholars Program, along with Sarah Solomon and Lucy Touton, to train community leaders to co-lead research. So it's a program that's now in its 9th year. It's a cohort-based model which spans 2 semesters each year and really trains community members on a range of research skills about the research process and really culminating with a symposium and pitch every year in which they pitch their ideas for research studies to academics and local funders. And then finally, what I'll say is in our work at the Penn Medicine Center for Health Justice, which is led by Dr. Gina South, we really focus on breaking down those structures that create and perpetuate inequities in the first place. And so our vision is really racial, economic, and environmental justice for Black and all people in neighborhoods and populations impacted by structural injustices. The Urban Health Lab is one arm of our work, which focuses on research and community action. We also have an arm or portfolio of work that focuses on health center transformation, really looking at how to really examine and repair structures that have perpetuated these injustices in the first place. And my final word around the work that we've done in terms of research that's proven that having green spaces in communities, having access to green spaces, as we all know, I think, can really have significant impact on health, social well-being of communities, and all sorts of outcomes for communities most in need. And just through systematic disinvestment, we've seen that there are certain communities here in Philadelphia and across this nation that just have an absence of or lack of sufficient green spaces to really help benefit those communities. So taking that research, Penn Medicine and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia have invested in West and Southwest Philadelphia neighborhoods through the Urban Health Lab and ARM, again, a portfolio of work under the Center for Health Justice, to create green spaces, to partner with communities, listen to communities, and help them to recognize and achieve their visions for green spaces within their neighborhoods.
Thank you, Nicole. Just to add to that, as you said, if you haven't had the chance, please look at a tree cover map of Philadelphia to see where the concentrations of foliage is. And if you cross-compare it to different demographics in Philadelphia, you'll see Nicole's point really underscored there. We move on to Kristina. So your work in the Colombian Andes and Amazon has put you in touch with the complex matrix of nature, people, and development. This is made even more complicated by war and criminality. Each stakeholder group envisions a different outcome for the future of this land that they either inhabit, work on, or militarize. When you've worked with communities who live on this land, how do these conflicts affect the environment, and in turn the community's well-being? And is there a role for storytelling and elevating local voices?
Well, also to express my thanks to Stu for organizing this event and inviting me to participate, and to also have a chance to learn and listen to other colleagues at Penn that I may not have had the chance to get to know yet. So this is really interesting. I think one of the struggles and one of the shifts that's happened, especially when we think about post-peace accord transitions, I wouldn't say post-conflict, because it's not the case in most places that have endured long-term armed conflict or geopolitical conflicts and social conflict. They call it post-conflict. But is the shifts that have gone from kind of human rights-centric or international humanitarian-centric understandings of violence to understanding violence as something that is a life-shared alteration, that obviously that one understands that the places most affected by whether degradation, by contamination, by bombardment, by soil that are filled with bombs, these are not just human experienced situations, right? That it's mostly the most vulnerable communities that are affected by structural violence and that have been disenfranchised and discriminated against, that are also sharing these realities with other than human beings and actors that are affected. So that questions of conflict and war are never only human experienced violences, and also in that case, justice and reparations and restitution are never only human centric orientations and proposals. And that's the same as in socio-natural disaster situations. We can hardly say that there are natural disasters. Mostly they're socio-natural, right? Because who is living in the spaces that disasters are happening in, right? Those are not rivers' faults. Those are not mountains' faults when they fall on right? These are the dynamics, hydrogeological dynamics. It's that populations, and mostly vulnerable, marginalized, racialized, discriminated populations are now in these spaces for different reasons that were not inhabited before. So how we think about moving forward in terms of justice and reparations and things. And so I think for me that has been a big shift that has opened up in Colombia, at least in that the conversations and that understandings about the conflict, the armed conflict and the war on drugs, which are in nexus, the U.S.-Colombia war on drugs, for instance, or the hemispheric war on drugs, global war on drugs and terror, it links up with these armed conflicts nationally, are never only human experience situations. So hence, going forward, it has to be about life building, cultivating life across human and other than human, and repairing these territories, that territories are victims, rivers are victims, soils are victims, as much as they are actors. In these kinds of scenarios.
Thank you. And thank you for waiting patiently, Henry. Moving on before we get into the more conversational piece, your work, Henry, on developing novel approaches to orally delivering affordable pharmaceuticals stems from healthcare inequity and human rights issues exacerbated by environmental stressors and the climate crisis. How do you view these innovations in healthcare integrated in environmental justice? And what criteria do you consider vital to ensure we are including healthcare as part of the environmental justice movement?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting. Thank you for the panel members sharing your thoughts on various aspects. Also, thank you for giving the opportunity to call to attention the health inequity, global access, limited global access to healthcare. I understand that in environment, food and water comes before health, but when someone is dying of a disease, health care and treatment comes first. And the impact of environment on global healthcare, the more recent pandemic, an outbreak that started in Wuhan, it reached all over the globe. So it's no longer contained to a particular environment. And a lot of new diseases come with changes in environment, but also people, because of climate changes, people move around, and therefore the disease spreads much faster. And so there is real need to address the global access, and the access means affordable healthcare. And I'll give you a couple of examples because this may not be that commonly known. You may know about the recent breakthroughs. Penn developed gene therapy for blindness and gene therapy for. So this is not Penn. The hemophilia who received gene therapy, each injection costs for hemophilia B $2.9 million and $3.5 million. How many of the people in the globe can afford that if they are hemophilia in a developing world? Just during the break, my son came to visit me from California. He's employed, he has insurance, but then he tested positive for COVID. We went to the pharmacy and Paxlovid. He said that the pharmacy that his insurance covers is not in Pennsylvania. They asked him to pay $1,600. So this is just unreal. And this is not about infectious diseases. It's about, let's say, insulin. Last year, insulin was sold for $22 billion. The average income in a developing world is $2 a day. So where is the treatment, and where is the affordability, where is the global access? And what is the reason for this cost is that the insulin, when I came to this country, the first call I made to my home cost me $75, and my salary was $500. And today, Skype and Zoom, it's free. I can see and talk to them. It's still the same insulin that was sold 70 years ago, but in fancy pumps. And the pump costs $12,000 a day. So my challenge to the community and to the panel and to the enhancing the access is that regulatory agencies and funding agencies, NIH funds every year $50 billion. They've been funding for over 100 years. Please search and find out how many times they use the word affordable access and see how many grants that NIH has funded. Okay, so that is the gap. Those who, like UK has before a drug is approved, they have an ethical panel looking at the cost, but US doesn't. So there are so many structural changes that are needed to address the deficiency in global health and access. Could that be solved? Absolutely, there are examples. A couple of years ago, the FDA approved peanut allergy product made in a plant cell. And that costs about $3,000 a year compared to $200,000 a year newly introduced drug. That's because the way they are produced and they are delivered. And so technology is available, but that's mostly not done by, it's not a priority. And therefore, I certainly want to call attention to the approaches that are available, but then the lack of initiatives to care about those people who need them the most. And again, it's no longer a disease located in a particular region. If someone cannot get Paxlovid, then it's infecting everybody else around. So it is not only just helping those who need the medicine, but also helping ourselves to prevent transmission. Thank you.
Thank you all. One commonality that I noticed among all of your responses is people first in research, people first in your initiatives, people first in your projects. I want to thank you all, first and foremost, for all of the incredible work that you guys have done over the years, first off. So we'll move more into the general Q&A portion, and I'll start with a more broad question about how research and activism can work together with the community and with other departments to advance environmental justice. I will just ping somebody first to get the conversation started, Rand.
Well, I think about this in the context of university community partnerships or university school partnerships. And I think even the most well-intended partnerships, whether they come from the university side or the community side, they invariably run up against the issue of power. There's like a power imbalance, and that can spell danger. And I think even if there is a unified set of goals that's bringing the different partners together, from the community side and from the university side, there are also these ancillary goals that come into play. University researchers are thinking about lines on their CV or research opportunities for their students, and they may not necessarily map directly onto the priorities and needs of the communities. And I think a useful framework that I've used and I've written about for thinking about these sorts of partnerships and for community-based participatory research in general is thinking about the relationship and whether it's exploitative, whether it's transactional, or whether it's transformative. And so just sort of at a baseline, what we don't want is exploitative kinds of relationships where one side is gaining more than the other. And I think that speaks to the power concerns that I raised earlier. Sort of at a minimum are these transactional relationships where it's, it may seem a little bit, it's not as inspiring, but there could be some value to having some transactional relationship where it's, we provide this for you and you provide this for us. But what I hope we can aspire to in all of the kinds of partnerships that are occurring at Penn is something that's more transformational, where all of the sides benefit from the partnership. We're all better off from the partnership. And I think if there's open and honest discussion across the stakeholders, and by the way, I said university school or university community, and we know that within the community there are different subsets. There are community organizers and community-based organizations as well as participants. And on the university side, there are administrators and faculty and students, but that as long as there's a shared understanding that, the expectation that whether we are striving for something that's transformational or that we're okay with something that's more transactional, that everyone understands that, and at all costs that we avoid something that is exploitative.
Thank you. Any other responses to university community partnerships and how that can promote environmental justice?
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. And so, I'll just piggyback on what you were speaking to. So for the ETC framework, I think it really is important to examine the relationship piece of these partnerships. I really do believe firmly that I think you alluded to this. So in some cases, transactional relationships and partnerships are exactly what the community wants because of other demands or other reasons. But the whole transformational process, I think, again, centering community is the key to it. We have the power. We I'm a community member and an academic right now, speaking of we in the academy. But we have the power in these relationships, and we really do have to take measures to adjust for that power dynamic. Because it's real, it's perceived by community members, and to not speak to it and put measures in place to address it really just keeps perpetuating that dynamic. And so I think that's one thing. The other thing is continue to build the capacity of community members to co-lead when it comes to research. And so, which is why I think the Community Scholars Program here at Penn is so important, that we have community members who are trained, they're skilled, they're knowledgeable, they sort of know where to draw the line in the sand, and they're able to advocate on behalf of their constituents and communities to ensure that there are equitable partnerships. And I think the final thing that I will say is this whole idea of assessing these partnerships and understanding exactly what the community and academic, sort of reasons for or agendas may be, and to map those goals so that one, it's transparent, it's clear. It's okay if they don't all align, but they need to be clear. There needs to be transparency in the communications and the agenda. I always go back to Relationships 101. You want people to be honest, open, straightforward. You want them to be reliable. And you want to make sure that you can have a common goal that you work toward, even if you have other goals that may not be the other person or party's goals within the relationship. And then finally, I do believe in the principles of CBPR in terms of sharing decision-making. That goes back to power and sharing resources. Community members should be paid if there's grants that are supporting a study for the work that they're doing.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Actually, to bounce off of that, we've heard a lot about each of your incredible projects and the great advancements that you've made, but I wanted to steer the conversation towards barriers and challenges. So for anybody on our panel today, what are some significant barriers that you've come across in your work that can get in the way of achieving environmental justice?
Maybe I could start responding. Absolutely. The challenge is first recognizing the problem. Penn is a powerhouse of medical research. Penn has launched vaccines and gene therapy, cancer therapy. So we have the power, we have the experience, but are any of those addressing global access and healthcare access, affordability, cost of healthcare, right? So the first challenge is recognizing and prioritizing that healthcare is important, novelty, breakthrough, that's important, but how many people does it serve? How many people the innovations reach? So there are a lot of innovations that need to be translated to the end users, and so the goal should be that if we develop a vaccine, last year, a couple of years ago in Africa, 19 million doses of vaccine donated couldn't be given to the patients because it required refrigeration, freezer, and they didn't have it, okay? So where is the technology to deliver a drug that is free of cold chain? It is, it's available, but it's not prioritized. So the challenge is prioritizing and getting into the priorities of the leadership. And at Penn, at the national level, because clearly technologies are pioneered here and used elsewhere, but it shouldn't be focusing just on local, but it needs to be global.
Thank you.
I mean, I think one could talk about challenges on different levels that one faces as a researcher, but in terms of environmental justice, I think one of the, at least in the context of where I do work and have been doing work for the last 20 years, is that environmental science is often in languages, the sciences are dominating that conversation. They're technical conversations, or legal fields, environmental law is dominating those conversations in juridical terminologies. Engineers are dominating that conversation in which there is no sense of that the problem is not already determined, that they don't know what the problem is, that they actually need to take steps back and determine the problem with communities, or that they not even be problems according to the community members, right? That then are getting these infrastructural solutions or these kinds of mitigation projects, or so all this work that has to go into decolonizing, if you want to say, or the need for spaces of knowledge exchanges and wisdom and practice exchanges, and all practitioners in conversation and not simply experts, these kind of expert fields dominating the decision-making about environmental environmental justice, aka law, taking in over that, or environmental science in these kind of technical spheres. So I think that's something that the work that anthropologists, as an anthropologist, it's not just about translating, from technical terms into non-technical languages. It's about how can community, as was said here, community knowledges and community visions and community experience and ancestral and popular and traditional knowledges be informing scientists, rather than the science just be translated into the language that other people who are not scientific specialists can understand. And the same with law and judges and all these other actors that I've also worked with in Colombia to do this kind of work. And I think in terms of the university, there is, and we have to think about as researchers how the university is supporting our ability to do work that is meaningful, that is not only academic publications, but that actually other kinds of outcomes that are not ever going to be not even in English, perhaps, if that's not the language, how that gets registered in terms of our ability to be tenured professors and to keep our, and I think, so that's there's different conversations, right, according to community situations with this question of justice, environmental justice obstacles versus as researchers in the university.
Can I throw in one more?
Absolutely.
I think there's aspects of environmental justice that are seen as political or subject to partisan politics. And sort of alongside this phenomenon, as we know, public opinion on higher education also has a partisan divide, increasingly so. And so I think that's going to make the challenge, I think that just adds to the challenge. And so, I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think that's something that I'm increasingly worried about.
Thank you. Just echoing what everyone has said in the last few minutes, community science, profitability, and bipartisan politics, and language translation and science communication. Some of these are positives and things that we're looking forward to addressing and incorporating into research, and some are extremely significant barriers that have very complicated solutions. So thank you all for your responses. I'd like to move towards a positive note as well, and looking and ask the panelists here today, what gives you hope for the future of environmental justice? So in the news we do hear about some very challenging aspects every single day. Even most recently. But is there anything that you guys are looking forward to, anything upcoming in research, or something that has shown in your own research that you think could be furthered for environmental justice?
Certainly I could give one example that we look forward to. There are several clinical trials in progress right now. The simple example is a chewing gum that prevents transmission of the virus and infection. So antiviral protein is put in the chewing gum, and in fact, this is a clinical trial. Presently, the product is approved by FDA, and the clinical trial is in progress. there are many more such examples of transmission of not only coronavirus, but also HPV, which causes oral cancer, and influenza, flu season every year, oral herpes, and all of that. So there are many promising avenues that are opening up and very close to decreasing the gap of, you can't charge $1 million for a chewing gum, right? So the whole approach is towards affordability and so on. This is done here at Penn. And so there's a lot of opportunities. We have oral insulin. Instead of delivering it through a pump, it is delivered through a capsule. So there are many more such opportunities as long as the funding is available and testing is done, not just here, but around the globe, so that it reaches those who need the most. So there are a lot of promising opportunities.
Thank you. And I wanted to give a special note to that because when I read about chewing gum and preventing the transmission of COVID, that is incredibly awesome. And when I hear about, in my personal experience, hearing about getting medicine to global vulnerable populations, transporting, and logistics is generally cited as the top item. I think it's probably fairly easy to ship something chewing gum size, so I appreciate the work that you've done, and it's really exciting to hear that it's moved forward in clinical trials. Thank you. Any other responses?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that what gives me hope is perhaps even catalyzed by social justice movements and partisan politics and all of the other things that sort of put pressure on this whole movement itself, is all of the, sort of uprisings of activity, initiatives, programs embedded in communities throughout the world that I think, and I am hopeful, will merge and really leverage the immense human capital and talents to make an impact.
I think that it's very hopeful to me that I've seen a shift in, like I was saying, away from these kind of human-centric terms of struggle with human rights and international humanitarian law, and that it's precisely women, female-based activists and leaders and youth that have taken up environmental justice and these in this shift in the kind of, and not just rights-based struggles, but about defense of life and territory, and it's really inspiring to me that it's mostly women and youth, and I find that much more hopeful than some of the masculinist dominations of these conversations that have dominated previously social justice. And I also think that something that's hopeful to me, I see like even the International Red Cross and the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and these moves of environmental law to understand the limits of modern law, the limits of the modern courts, that it's not, like I was talking about at the beginning, only human suffering or human violence against human lives and degradation in that kind of sense, but that there's these moves to recognize the kinds of violations that have occurred from new biotechnologies, but also war and other kinds of things. And I think, and that owes its indebtedness to communities, to Native peoples, to indigenous communities, to local communities that have been doing this philosophical and conceptual work in practice for millennial, right, that somehow now gets taken up by rights of nature discourses and earth jurisprudence and other spaces, and it's a debt to these communities. And I think that the recognition of that slowly within academic and even legal circles is really, in political and kind of public policy, is really important and hopeful.
Thank you.
Last year, through an ABCS course, Penn students and I worked with students at Hamilton Elementary, Hamilton on 58th and Spruce, the sixth graders there, so sixth grade, maybe like 11, 10 years old, on a lesson, sort of a set of lessons around climate justice and how it impacts their lives and the lives of their families in West Philadelphia. And that was just an inspiring, it was just inspiring to be around young people especially young people at that age who are so sophisticated in their understanding of these issues and can break down from a real kind of clear racial justice standpoint how these disparate impacts are affecting their lives. And so, people have talked about the power of young people, and I think that's certainly the case.
Thank you. So interesting to hear you brought up Hamilton, because I did a water-focused lesson there with 6th graders, and I thought none of them knew what a watershed was, but color me surprised when they could all define it. There's a lot of schools in Philadelphia, and water education is even integrated into the curriculum there. Elevating the voices of youth is extremely important because we listen to them.
And the classroom teachers there are just totally on board too.
Phenomenal. Thank you. I wanted to first see if the audience has some questions. I have some in mind, but I wanted to give some space if anyone has a particular question. If you do, please stand up and say your question. Okay, and online as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so one that we got from online that, Kristina, you actually touched upon, but I'm curious because we do have a panel of people who are all outside of like traditional environmental fields. How do you see researchers specifically who are outside of traditional hard sciences and environmental sciences contributing meaningfully to environmental justice research, and how can they do that?
Thank you. Yeah, that actually tags on to my question. I was going to ask about public-private partnerships. Has that factored into anyone's work?
So, I mean, on the one hand, it's not a rejection of the role of science and technology, right? But it's finding those allies, people who are in those fields who are thinking critically about their own knowledge production processes and questioning their expertise and their disciplinary and genealogies, right? And that want to come and have conversations in which they are sharing and being taught with communities, right? And finding those people. So it is the role of people who are outside of these kind of fields, traditional fields. We do also need to understand the environmental science and technological questions, and or legal as another place that I often work at, those conjunctures, right? And so finding those allies. And I think the other is the importance of exactly like I think I didn't answer that part of your question because there was a lot in that question you asked me about storytelling and other kinds of, like what the role of arts and humanities and film and poetry and radio programming and the different methodologies that come up depending on the communities and publics and interlocutors that you're working with, what actually is the way to reach different people and translate these very technical or juridical conversations into other languages, and that requires arts and humanities, right, methodologies, and hence the environmental humanities and the medical humanities, right, as kind of interdisciplinary, interesting places of collaboration in emerging kinds of fields or transdisciplinary fields.
I certainly want to add to that. Thank you for your comments. Having developed technologies and walking it through clinical trials to the end users, I realized that it takes an entire village. It's just not the lab. And Katie is here, who has written so many stories that brought people who read those stories, brought investment. And this is how technology, lab experiments are different, but almost 90% of the activity is outside the lab. And so this requires the storyteller's ability to communicate that to the public, and those who read them become part of the investment, and they need to pay for the clinical trials. And at the very early stage, and just the knowledge that how the environmental change impacts. In medicine, it does. For 100 years, these proteins, drugs, insulin, everything is produced in fermentation, that each day they release tons and tons of carbon dioxide. But then you produce them in plants, it captures carbon dioxide. All this education starts at the very early level. So essentially, some things, key things happen in the lab, but most of the process is driven by those outside the level at all levels, from high school, junior school, all the way up to the journalists and attorneys. Patents are filed without which you can't, so it involves everybody outside the lab.
Thank you. Before I do, because I have a few other questions, but does anyone else have a question online or in the audience today? Yes.
Can I take this off the stand and pass it?
Thank you. So first of all, thank you all for being here and for the great discussion so far. I wanted to ask, when you're trying to make change in issues of environmental justice, particularly with regards to some of the larger structural challenges that I think you've all referenced at some point today, how do you draw the attention of policymakers to these problems, especially if the communities that they affect don't necessarily have as much political power, or the policymakers themselves don't have as much experience with the issues firsthand?
Great question.
I will just say that I do believe institutions such as ours at the University of Pennsylvania have a role to play in really helping leverage and amplifying the voices of communities. We have a vast set of resources available to us: human, financial, physical, intellectual, that we could lend to community voice and community causes, and sort of actually leverage relationships to lean on policymakers to really advance an agenda. So I do think that if it's something that is important, and speaking to the previous question, we all have a role to play when it comes to environmental justice. And so I think we should be thinking about how institutions could sort of leverage their positions to move that agenda forward.
Thank you.
I think on the other hand, one of the strategies, it's multiple strategies at once, right? Like how to create campaigns, how to be using the media, how to find legal allies when communities need that kind of consultation, right? To put in, tribunal kind of, or court, but also about building alternative spaces of institutional community autonomy. Forms that communities can diagnose their own problems, observatories in which they're monitoring their own situations, right? Like our own education processes. I mean, that's something that we're doing in the Colombian Amazon, is creating Andean Amazonian popular education, because the schools aren't teaching how to live in the Amazon and be Amazonian and not destroy the Amazon, and what are even the professional paths for people in that region. It's all about extractivism. It's not actually about how to live in the territory and care for it and have a sustainable, dignified life there. So building actually is not relying on the public institutions or on the political actors or administrations at the moment. It's actually about the communities building their own spaces of autonomy to do this environmental justice and become guardians and have networks of guardianship over their territory and defend their territory from these same actors that are supposedly representing them in these spheres. So I think there's multiple things at once, right? Like the amount of time you have to dedicate to trying to make the state or make institutions do their job and not be corrupt, and actually, and then on the other hand, how do you empower communities to take over a lot of spaces that they don't need to rely on these institutions or entities to be doing the work that they may or may not be doing, depending on who's in power, who won the election, or whatever. If you understand what I mean. So multiple strategies at once.
Thank you.
I think policy is a double-edged sword. It could work both ways. The example that I gave 40 years ago when I came here, made my first phone call. It cost $75. It's free today. Is that due to any government policy? No, it was through innovation. So it's not, that kind of a change has not happened in global healthcare access. It has happened in global communication access. So it's, when I visit India, I see remote villages, farmers plowing the field, having cell phone, and they text in between. So that is an example how it's not happening by policy. I don't think any government. It's just the innovation is needed, and the pressure to do that. Of course, in case of NIH, if they are funding $50 billion every year, could they give priority to affordability? Could they prioritize research on global access? So that would help, definitely, but at the same time, the drive needs to come from institutions like Penn, where there is abundant opportunity for innovation. So there need to be examples of innovation, and the policy could come in and boost the advancement of technology.
Thank you. Leading into the final minutes of our panel discussion and acknowledging our attendees online and here today, what could a student's role be in advancing environmental justice? We may only have time for just one or two responses, but if everyone would like to respond, you can keep it really short.
Well, I think all of us in this room know the ways that students can be involved, and I would just say, like, there are these formal structures and there are formal avenues, there's formal pathways to be involved. But I also encourage you and your students to consider informal connections that you can make, informal work that you do, joining or working with a community-based organization here locally, lending your talents or expertise in service of others. And so it doesn't have to happen within the structure of a lab or some research opportunity. We're fortunate that we have many talented entrepreneurial students. That's sort of the ethos of Penn, and I encourage everyone just to sort of carve their own pathway or make their own connections.
Thank you. Like to Kristina.
I mean, I think more than a question about how students, I think that for students to be able to better participate in this kind of work, there needs to be changes at the level of pedagogy and in programs and departments, and actually creating much more ability for transdisciplinary education and teaching people in the STEM fields and in the science and engineering schools to have the ability to interact with students from the social sciences and arts and humanities and have to think about problems together and have to learn how to converse across differences and learn how to listen just as much as occupy space and speak from your expertise. And I think that, that would be wonderful, because there are engineering students who are asking for, they want classes on justice, they want classes on not just bioethics, for instance, the medical, they want to think about justices and the interface of environmental justice with other kinds of justices. And I think it would be wonderful if we had more ability to train students in that way so that students could better participate and actually be different kinds of professionals when they graduate and move on out of this institution, right? So I would put that on the university as much as the students in that sense. And like, who are the faculty that we're trying to do that, and what are those institutions and centers that are trying to do that, and how we can better support that work of building that opportunity.
Thank you, Kristina. Great point. Yes.
Thank you all so much. My question is for Ms. Thomas. Specifically, I'm curious, given the both history and ongoing role that Penn plays in racism and gentrification, specifically of the West Philly neighborhoods, how do you build trust with the people in the community coming from this institution that has that's like so deeply seeped in the racism and gentrification that's contributing to the issues in their community?
Great question. So I'll just say this. For me, from a historical perspective and family perspective, my family was a part of the community that was displaced due to the expansion of this great institution decades ago. And through my grandmother, who organized folks for decades and led a large nonprofit in West Philadelphia, I've learned that it's just important to build relationships. She actually is the reason why I'm here today working inside the institution, because as much as she rallied against Penn, she also formed alliances to get things done. And so I do believe it's all relationship-based. One of the things I tell folks, first and foremost, you have to acknowledge the reality of this situation. And the reality is that some folks have that many folks have historical knowledge and poor experiences. And I think all of us, it's our job to change those experiences for people. And I think to the extent that we're successful at building authentic relationships that are not exploitive, that are transformational, that are sustained beyond a period of a research project or a study, to the extent that we can acknowledge the hurt that has been caused and the harm that's been done, and to the extent that we can align agendas with folks in different communities and form common sort of agendas and be true to those, again, back to basic relationship things, we can move the needle some. It's oftentimes difficult when there's new things that come up. And I do think that, it's a large institution. One of the things that I say is that, it's really the reason why it's important for folks like us to work together. Because work has to be done, and for me, I do believe, I use an analogy all the time of being a part of a basketball team. And so everybody has a position on a basketball team. My position is here within the institution, and we're all taking shots toward the same goal. So we're all in it to win the game, regardless of what position we're playing. I think we just have to consistently sort of have that same target in mind and be, cohesive in terms of how we work. It's no more tricks, that communities are too sophisticated at this point, and they're organized. And so I do think it's really important to just acknowledge past hurt, build authentic relationships, and sort of be consistent in our actions today. That's basically what we can do.
Thank you. And I want to say, I think that kind of took the place of my closing remark. I kind of just want to end there and give a special thanks to our panelists today, Ran Quinn, Nicole Thomas, Kristina Lyons, and Henry Daniell. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you both so much. Thank you all for attending virtually and online. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
And feel free to take some food on your way out.